Wish you all a very good evening, respected seniors and my dear colleagues. With your permission, I begin the presentation of today's topic titled Evolving Role of Nintedanib in Post-COVID Lung Fibrosis. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Shourabh Das Choudhury. I'm a practicing physician at Behrampur. At the very first, the outline of our presentation, but we really want to analyze and understand the intricacies and may I call the clinical beauty of the role of anti-fibrotic agent in a rather small subsection of post-COVID fibrosis patients. But at first, the outline of today's presentation, post-COVID lung fibrosis, we'll try to analyze and understand the prevalence, the incidence, the progression, how many patients become better, how many patients become status, how many patients actually worsen, where exactly the role of certain antifibrotic agents fit in, the role of antifibrotic therapy in post-COVID interstitial lung disease, nintedanib, and brief overview comparison with pirfenidone. Will be also be dedicating at least one slide to certain other novel therapeutic agents. We'll summarize our data, but at the very onset, as mentioned by our presenter, we will really try to understand a concept rather than deal with evidence. Unfortunately, we are in the midst of this pandemic, probably towards the fag end of the second wave, which was more of a tsunami rather than a wave. We are now gearing up for the dreaded third wave as well. Hopefully, a significant number of that is the Indian population would be getting at least a single dose of vaccine by the time this very dreaded third wave comes in. But what I'm trying to highlight is that unlike other therapeutic areas, when we are talking about COVID, the treatment of COVID, and much more importantly, here it would be a post COVID complication lung fibrosis, essentially a very novel area, an area where we have limited understanding, an area where we have limited data, and of course, evidence. What we base ourselves on is very limited in this area. So, essentially, it's mostly anecdotal evidence, case series, and case studies. Because at the very onset, since we are in an era of evidence based medicine, so what are our hierarchy of your evidence in evidence based medicine? Now, essentially, the highest level of evidence, as we know, would be a meta analysis, followed by a randomized controlled trial, followed by non randomized controlled trial, followed by prospective cohort studies, followed by retrospective case control studies, followed by maybe a case series, followed by case studies, and ultimately an expert opinion. But unfortunately, we are in the midst of the pandemic. We really can't be affording to have meta analysis and well established randomized controlled trial in the midst of the pandemic. We are fighting death at our borders. So essentially, much of our knowledge is based on anecdotal evidence. Much of our understanding of the post-COVID lung fibrosis is based on case studies, is based on case series, and sometimes retrospective data analysis. But realistically, to have a full-on head-to-head trials is very limited. Yes, now we have some data from at least placebo controlled trial, but more of that is based on the different subsets of interstitial lung disease, including but not limited to idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis rather than hardcore post-COVID lung fibrosis. But because we understand the cytokine associated pathway and the pathogenesis of the post-COVID lung fibrosis is along similar lines to other coronavirus damages and other similar restrictive lung disease, is why we are trying to understand the role of nintedanib and pirfenidone, and for that matter, the entire avenue of antifibrotic therapy in post-COVID interstitial lung disease. So realistically, we don't really have a very well established randomized controlled trial or head-to-head trial. We are basing ourselves on anecdotal evidence. Post-COVID lung fibrosis, the post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, a small proportion of severe COVID-19 cases with acute respiratory distress syndrome continue to remain hypoxemic despite adequate treatment. Chest imaging of this subset of patients revealed fibrotic changes in the form of traction bronchiectasis and will actually find that there is not only traction bronchiectasis but bronchiolectasis as well, architectural distortion and septal thickening similar to the changes seen in other fibrotic lung disease. Previous coronavirus outbreaks like SARS and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome have been associated with substantial post-viral fibrosis. We will find that SARS at least radiologically produces a possibly worse picture compared to the COVID-19, but we'll talk about that. Available data indicate that about 40% of patients with COVID-19 develop ARDS and 20% of the ARDS cases are severe. Kindly note that this is a publication from the FAG end of 2020. So essentially data collected from the early part of the first wave. We do understand now that some of the cases previously classified under ARDS with COVID, we do now understand quite clearly the prothrombotic stage and the procoagulant pathophysiological basis of certain complications of COVID-19. So yes, something which previously could have been a pulmonary thromboembolism were sometimes classified as ARDS cases under COVID, but we have a slightly better understanding, not fully, but a slightly better understanding of the pathophysiological basis of COVID-19 compared to the early part of the first wave in the different countries, particularly Europe, and now towards the fag end of the second wave, we have a slightly better understanding about the pathophysiological basis, particularly the procoagulant state. Very important publication by Dr. Udvadia and others in Lung India, the post-COVID lung fibrosis, the tsunami that will follow the earthquake. The earthquake here, of course, is the COVID itself, and the tsunami, the proverbial tsunami that we are talking about, is the post-COVID lung fibrosis. We'll be looking at the different cytokines and chemokines that are involved in the post-COVID lung fibrosis. We are looking at the pathophysiological basis. So the SARS-CoV-2, the virus entry is through the ACE2 angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, ultimately leading to viral replication and liberation of the cytokines, the T cell mediated damage, the cytokine mediated damage, immune response, and ultimately the lung fibrosis. The cytokine overexpression in fibrosis and COVID-19. When damage occurs in the lung tissue, a set of growth factors and cytokines including MCP1, that is the monocyte chemoattractant protein 1, the tissue tumor growth factor 1, the tumor necrosis factor alpha, the fibroblast growth factor, the platelet derived growth factor, the interleukin 1 beta, IL-6, as we know, we have talked about the role of tocilizumab. It's an anti-IL-6 molecule in the COVID, are overexpressed and released by cells. And recent reports show that the serum levels of the aforementioned cytokines and growth factors are also highly increased in COVID-19 patients. Kindly note the names of the cytokines. Essentially, when we will be looking at the mechanism of action of nintedanib and compare it to pirfenidone, we will be coming across the names of these cytokines as well. The radiological features of post-COVID interstitial lung disease, interstitial thickening, air bronchogram, irregular interface, traction bronchiectasis, traction bronchiectasis, coarse reticular pattern, septal thickening, parenchymal bands, honeycomb pattern, diffuse alveolar damage, reticulations. We'll be talking about the impact and the prevalence of reticulations, how they are increasing with the number of weeks, how the ground glass opacity is an early finding. With time, reticulations become a more important finding. We'll be looking at the HRCT changes from 2nd to the 4th to the 6th to the 8th week, how the progression is occurring. Pulmonary fibrosis secondary to COVID-19, a call to arms. Now, pulmonary fibrosis may develop early after hospital discharge in approximately as high as 40% patients. Older patients with severe illness are more prone to develop fibrosis, and one of the major risk factors would be an area of my work, diabetes. I with a pulmonologist and a radiologist, ma'am, we are currently working on a paper pertaining to post-COVID fibrosis in the diabetic subset, understanding the causal association with the higher HbA1c at presentation. Imaging findings in COVID-19 pneumonia seem to be milder than SARS. Is something that we have discussed. Let us annotate this a bit. It has been a slightly dry lecture for a while now. Yes, this is section A. This is at early part images of the peripheral mild ground glass opacities. Look at the ground glass opacity here and look at the rapid progress. This has occurred within 2 weeks. Look at the very extensive reticular pattern. This is the reticular pattern that we keep on talking about. This is the honeycombing pattern as well. So from this ground glass opacity that was present here in patches, look at how rapidly the gross reticular changes and the honeycombing appearance has occurred. I believe all of us treating COVID patients for the last year, we are now used to see such really bad CTs. But please note, we will be talking about the progression. Luckily or fortunately, significant number of COVID fibrosis tend to improve. A very small percentage tend to remain static, and even a smaller percentage tend to worsen, and probably the role of antifibrotic agent would be this relatively small subset of patients where the pulmonary fibrosis worsens over weeks or months. Another data under Dr. Woodwadia as well, fibrotic interstitial lung disease occurring as a sequelae of COVID-19 pneumonia despite concomitant steroids. Very important. We do know that at least initially among all the drugs that came up, essentially it is steroids, particularly dexamethasone, under which the majority of studies were being done. This is the steroids. Steroids are, we might call it the gold standard of therapy of moderate to severe pneumonia. So, if you think about a trident, that's three ways you attack the COVID. It's your steroids, oxygen, and in patients with desaturation, it would be anticoagulation. So these are the three things: oxygen, steroid, and anticoagulant in a subset. So no matter what other molecules you look at your hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin and ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, and with moderate requiring oxygen, even the remdesivir and tocilizumab, at the end of the day, there are three drugs producing mortality benefit in COVID with established evidence. It's your steroids, it's your oxygen, and essentially anticoagulation in a subset of patients. But what we are trying to highlight here is the role of concomitant steroid. So in spite of adequate high dose steroid therapy, there can be progression to interstitial lung disease in post-COVID scenario. The postulated mechanism for the development of post-COVID fibrosis. So the SARS-CoV-2 infection, once again we'll try to annotate this a bit, maybe with a change of color. The green is not really bright. Right. So the SARS-CoV-2 infection, this is COVID-19. Yes, working on the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, increasing the angiotensin levels, ultimately leading to accumulation of the extracellular matrix, as also the myofibroblast activation, and the tumor growth factor beta levels are increased as well, ultimately leading to lung fibrosis. And yes, the ventilator associated lung injury also significantly increase the chance of lung fibrosis. Kindly note that the procoagulant pathophysiological basis of COVID wasn't something that was immediately established or understood in the very early stage of COVID. Lot of patients with the really bad radiological images were presenting with severe respiratory distress. They were being concerned to be cases of ARDS arising out of COVID. And yes, so ventilator associated, you can call it iatrogenic. Essentially, it was a basis of misdiagnosis. Obviously, it was the early part of COVID. We are talking about the early part of the first wave. So way more patients had to be put on ventilation. This was a fact across Europe, be it Italy, be it Sweden, be it Germany, be it Spain, in the very early stage. And yes, the pathophysiological basis and the progression of chronic and acute pulmonary thromboembolism was not well established in the initial part of the first wave. So possibly more numbers of patients were being ventilated. And yes, ventilator associated lung injury is an causal factor for lung fibrosis as well. So the natural history of post-COVID lung fibrosis, yes, significant numbers improve. The most common sequelae of a post-COVID lung fibrosis is improvement. I have no doubt about that, but we are talking about this relatively small subset of patients who are worsening. We are talking about the least common progressing, but here is where we have a role of the anticoagulants, and this is what we will try to analyze as well. Early CT features and temporal lung changes in COVID-19 pneumonia. Long-term follow-up is required to determine whether the reticulation represents irreversible fibrosis. Yes, this is the thing I was talking about. With time, initially, obviously, the ground glass opacity is the major feature. But once from 2 to 3 to 4 weeks, what you will find is that the total proportion of patients with reticulations tend to increase. But yes, this is once again a paper from the early part of COVID. This is from September 2020. We have subsequent data that has come up. The predictors of post-COVID interstitial lung disease and fibrosis: higher levels of CRP and IL-6 during illness might lead to the formation of fibrosis during recovery. So the risk factors are advanced stage severe illness, prolonged ICU or hospital stay, mechanical ventilation, history of smoking, and chronic alcoholism. Pulmonary fibrosis in COVID-19, the potential role for antifibrotic therapy. The burden of fibrotic lung disease following SARS-CoV-2 infection is high. We don't have the exact incidence or prevalence, but yes, we have good retrospective data now, or linkage analysis based data now, to show that the burden of fibrotic lung disease following SARS-CoV-2 infection is high. There is a therapeutic rationale for the use of licensed antifibrotic therapy in acute exacerbations of IPF, that is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, including those triggered by viral infection. Available antifibrotic therapies might have a role in attenuating pro-fibrotic pathways in SARS-CoV-2 infection. It will always be, there might be some role, because we have seen the role in IPF, that is idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. We will be talking in details about the InBuild trial, which looked at interstitial lung disease patients without IPF. It looked at the 5 subgroups: the hypersensitivity pneumonitis, the autoimmune interstitial lung disease, the idiopathic non-specific interstitial pneumonia, and unclassifiable idiopathic interstitial pneumonia, and the 5th group would be the other ILDs. And this is data pertaining to nintedanib in the InBuild trial. We will look at the implications of the same. And the pulmonary fibrosis and COVID-19, the potential role for antifibrotic therapy. Onset of antifibrotic effect. So when we are comparing the nintedanib with the pirfenidone, now the data pertaining to inhibition of viral infection or disease is absent. These are not antiviral agent. They inhibit the experimental acute lung injury? Yes, pirfenidone does, but there is limited data pertaining to nintedanib. But we are not looking at the acute viral replication. We are not looking at the acute lung injury. We are looking at the post-COVID fibrosis, where 2 major chemoattractants or cytokines that have a very significant role to play in the establishment of post-COVID fibrosis, IL-1 and IL-6. So nintedanib and pirfenidone both have effects on IL-1 and IL-6 that you can see here. Right. Pulmonary fibrosis and COVID-19, the potential role for antifibrotic therapy, and in the placebo-controlled InBuild trial, and I've really talked about the subgroups of InBuild trial. So these were ILDs without IPF, and the pathogenetic pro-fibrotic pathways driven by immune dysregulation might have similarities to those pathways in SARS-CoV-2 infection. So once again, the 5 subgroups studied in the InBuild trial of nintedanib would be hypersensitivity pneumonitis, autoimmune interstitial lung disease, idiopathic non-specific interstitial pneumonia, unclassifiable idiopathic interstitial pneumonia, and the other ILDs. The study wasn't adequately powered to find a definitive benefit, but looking at the rate of progression of FVC reduction, there is data to as a proof of concept to prove the role of nintedanib to prevent fibrosis of the lung parenchyma. So COVID-19 and risk of pulmonary fibrosis, the importance of planning ahead. Yes, on your left hand, the acute COVID-19 pneumonia and subsequently the evolutive COVID-19 pneumonia. What you can see that on the left hand side the slide, apart from the ground glass opacities, show area of congestion or areas of consolidation indicative of the acute stage. Now once the stage of consolidation has gone away, on your right you can see the reticulations, which are pathognomonic of the fibrosis, which is the issue at hand. Mechanism of action. The nintedanib is a multiple receptor tyrosine kinase inhibitor. Nintedanib inhibits the following receptor tyrosine kinases: the PDGFR, that is the platelet derived growth factor alpha and beta, fibroblast growth factor 1 to 3, vasculoendothelial growth factor receptor 1 to 3, CSF1 receptor, that is the colony stimulating factor 1 receptor, and FMS like tyrosine kinase 3. I believe this is beyond the ambit of clinicians, so I'll slightly move away from this. But US FDA, the European Medicine Agency, and our DCGI, now regarding idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and the systemic sclerosis associated ILD, right? Now from both the US FDA and the European Medicines Agency, for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, for systemic sclerosis associated interstitial lung disease, and progressive fibrosing interstitial lung disease, recommendations are there from EMA and US FDA for all the three indications. For your pirfenidone, it's only IPF. Now DCGI is yet to get recommendations for PF-ILD, but I mean obviously it is following your US FDA, so you can expect 2021 to present here. Not being greedy, but yes, DCGI approval have followed the lines of US FDA and EMA. Regarding other indications, we expect the same to be there, as adequate data is now available for PF-ILD. The nintedanib versus pirfenidone in inhibiting pathways involved in the pathogenesis of fibrosis. Yes, a bigger ambit covered by the nintedanib. Now we understand that necessarily this does not establishment of superiority of one molecule over the other. Essentially, we don't have a head-on trial. We don't have pirfenidone versus nintedanib dedicated data at this point. But yes, the number of cytokines inhibited by pirfenidone, TNF alpha and TGF beta, there is some role in the IL-1 pathway also, as we know. But nintedanib do block the platelet derived growth factor, the fibroblast growth factor, the vasculoendothelial growth factor, the tumor growth factor alpha, and so on and so forth, as has been adequately discussed. So yes, at least if we consider the pathophysiological basis of lung fibrosis, greater number of molecules, greater types of molecules are being blocked by nintedanib compared to pirfenidone. But once again, this is not a clinical data. This is not human trial data. Essentially, this is data from preclinical studies. Now, recent clinical trials, and here we are moving on from preclinical data to hardcore clinical evidence. The recent clinical trials evaluating therapy of COVID-19 associated pulmonary fibrosis. So nintedanib compared to placebo, you can see it's a phase 2 trial. Pirfenidone, it's a phase 3 trial compared to standard treatment. Other different molecules we have. So we have this Fuzang Vio tablet, essentially a Chinese molecule. The human amniotic fluid, the mesenchymal stem cells, hyperbaric oxygen, all of them are being compared. You do understand these are very early phase trial in certain cases, phase 2 and even phase 1, phase 2 in multiple or even 3 cases. So essentially these are early studies. So actual projection from a clinical trial molecule to marketed molecule, essentially this will take time, and these are essentially very early proof of concept studies, if you may call it that. But we have some data from antifibrotic agent in different subgroups or different spectrum of the interstitial lung disease, particularly in relation to nintedanib. The INBUILD trial is of very significant value when we are looking at this horrible COVID pandemic situation that we have. Nintedanib has a wider approved indications, the three indications for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, for systemic sclerosis associated interstitial lung disease, and the progressive fibrosing interstitial lung disease. Early separation of the FBC decline curves, faster onset of action, mortality benefit, improves survival as we've seen in INBUILD, improves the quality of life. The INBUILD trial demonstrated efficacy and safety of nintedanib across various autoimmune ILDs, established a long-term safety and efficacy and comparable tolerability profile. And yes, less pill burden, because essentially if you have prescribed pirfenidone, you do understand multiple tablets per day. The up titration is also pretty complicated for the patient. So unlike pirfenidone, no need to up titrate. Optimum dose started from day 1 and daily recommended dose of 150 mg BD or 100 mg BD can be started from day 1, unlike pirfenidone, which takes 2 to 4 weeks to reach recommended daily dose of 2403. Once again, if you have prescribed it, you would know it's a pretty complicated up titration algorithm that we have. Potential COVID-19 patients who may get benefited with nintedanib or other antifibrotic agents: unexplained or disproportionate hypoxia, prolonged ventilation requirement with high oxygen support, severe ARDS. When HRCT shows some evidence of fibrosis, continue to be hypoxic post-discharge for prolonged period and follow-up HRCT showing progression of the fibrosis. This is the questions for the plenary, and we hope to have some discussion regarding this. So how many patients of post-COVID interstitial lung disease you saw out of total COVID patients? So as a percentage of patients or proportion of patients, we'd like to maybe weigh in on that. We can have a discussion after we complete this. We're towards the end. Which are the markers or clinical parameters to identify COVID patients eligible for antifibrotic therapy? Something that we have discussed, but essentially it would be clinical rather than lab markers. Essentially, this would be post-COVID pneumonia patients who are presenting with breathlessness or even frank hypoxia or hypoxemia, if that can be assessed at your clinic, and you essentially undertake spirometry with BDR in such patients showing restrictive pattern, and you can opt for HRCT and look at the progression. If the patient during the course of the acute COVID itself, if the patient had desaturated or other criteria pertaining to getting an HRCT done during the course of therapy is available to you, then the comparison between the two HRCT, that is during the acute phase with desaturation, compare that to the post-COVID scenario when the patient is presenting with a maintained or a progressing dyspnea. Any specific high group which shows greater propensity for development on progression of post-COVID fibrosis. We have looked at such high-risk group patients, previous smokers, previous alcoholics. In my very limited experience and from the data that we have collated from our patients, myself, another chest physician, and our radiology department, I believe poorly controlled diabetes, baseline HbA1c high at presentation is another potential risk factor. We haven't done a causal analysis as of now, but that seems to be another high risk group. Role of HRCT in diagnosis is of course paramount in establishing the diagnosis of the post-COVID interstitial lung disease. Of course, spirometry with BDR is a very important issue as well. When should it be performed? Yes, if you're getting your patient with post-COVID patients, dyspneic patient, you get a spirometry with BDR done, you're getting a restrictive pattern, and then you can get the HRCT done and compare the two HRCTs. At the end of the day, there will always be an overlap. Many of your patients will probably be having previous lung issue as well. Maybe previously undiagnosed interstitial lung disease is a possibility as well, but the pros and cons of things are there. Essentially, I keep on repeating this, we are in the midst of this pandemic. Having very well established data, particularly in a resource poor country as us, is slightly difficult. We do understand that even HRCT getting it done multiple times, IL-6, your D-dimers, these are slightly expensive tests for the Indian population. This is well understood. It's not really an insured population that we treat. I myself, working in a tier 2 city, I do face the challenges of finance, and that is an issue. Getting your wishful investigations on a routine basis, it's often pretty difficult. But yes, challenges are always there for you. What is the ideal time to start antifibrotics to prevent or retard progression of fibrosis? The preferred antifibrotics, pirfenidone or nintedanib. Why? We have talked about the limited evidence that we have as of now. Once again, trying to analyze this, yes, pirfenidone, basically one single indication where the approval is there. Nintedanib, we do understand that in a very short while, from 2014 to 2020, in US FDA and EMEA, the recommendations are there for the three subgroups already are there for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, for your collagen vascular disease like your systemic sclerosis, associated interstitial lung disease, for that rapidly progressive interstitial lung disease as well. And I mean, the ambit of therapy keeps on increasing, possibly making that a more attractive option. And we have the phase 2 trial with nintedanib and the phase 3 trial with pirfenidone specifically for post-COVID pneumonia that is going on. And essentially, it would be a randomized controlled trial such as those, which would be the ultimate clincher in selecting the drug. And for how long after discharge antifibrotic therapy needs to be continued in COVID patients. This is a matter as of now, I'm afraid we don't have adequate data to address this concern. It's an evolving concept. The role of antifibrotic therapy in post-COVID fibrosis, and that to a limited number of patients of post-COVID fibrosis. This is essentially data that is evolving as we go ahead. We are yet to have data from the phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials at this certain point. InBuild has given us certain answers pertaining to the safety, tolerability, in certain areas, the efficacy of nintedanib in particular related but a wide spectrum of interstitial lung disease like disease. But yes, in post-COVID fibrosis, it is still evolving area where our knowledge continues to grow every day. Thank you so much. We are at the end of a discussion and are open for a plenary session now.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh, for such a